struck again over the weekend, shooting a young couple in a Brooklyn lovers lane, and today the girl died. The killer's sixth victim. He's wounded 7 others.
Have you ever thought about what life is like for serial locked away in prison? What are they thinking as they spend their days and nights in cells, cut off from the world they once terrorized? Join us as we venture into the dark realm of crime, where once feared serial now exist as mere shadows of their former selves. These are the 8 most dangerous serial currently rotting in jail. Charles Cullen, often referred to as the Angel of Death, was a nurse who committed his heinous acts in a place where people expected care and safety: hospitals. Over a 16-year career across various medical facilities in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, Cullen an unknown number of patients, with estimates ranging from dozens to potentially hundreds. Cullen had a tragic start in life. Both of his parents died before he finished high school, and he often found himself the target of bullies. Despite these challenges, Cullen managed to enroll in the U.S. Navy, serving aboard a submarine. Due to issues fitting in and crew members bullying him, his time in the Navy was brief. After his discharge from the Navy, Cullen married and had 2 daughters, but his marriage ended in divorce in 1993. He began working in various medical centers across New Jersey and Pennsylvania, where his spree would start. Cullen's method of was insidious. He administered lethal doses of medications to his patients, often choosing drugs like digoxin and insulin, which he injected into the patient's IV bags. At St. Barnabas Medical Center, Cullen committed his first known. He admitted to several patients there using poisoned IV bags. When suspicions arose, Cullen would move to another hospital, continuing his deadly pattern. He worked at Warren Hospital in New Jersey, where he 3 elderly women with lethal doses of digoxin. Despite the growing suspicions and occasional investigations, Cullen managed to pass a polygraph test and continued to find work due to a national shortage of nurses. His technique didn't change much over the years, and Cullen frequently lethally injected victims who were already on the mend. His final were committed at Somerset Medical Center. Cullen's behavior finally raised red flags when he began requesting medications for patients not under his care and accessed records of patients he wasn't assigned to. The hospital alerted the police, and Cullen was eventually fired for falsifying information on his job application. Charles Cullen was under surveillance for weeks before being arrested. During a conversation with a colleague who was wearing a wire, Cullen revealed details about his crimes. He claimed he patients to save them from suffering, but many of his victims were in stable condition before his interventions. On March 2, 2006, Cullen received 11 consecutive life sentences and was not eligible for parole until the year 2403. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., also known as the Golden State, is a former police officer whose crimes spanned over a decade, terrorizing California. DeAngelo is responsible for numerous crimes, burglaries, and earning him different nicknames in various regions due to his changing modus operandi. In the San Joaquin Valley, he was known as the Visalia Ransacker. He then moved to Sacramento, where his series of unwanted actions earned him the name of the East Area Rapist. His in Southern California, including Ventura, Orange County, and Santa Barbara, led to him being called the original Night Stalker. DeAngelo's criminal methods were sophisticated and methodical. He often prepared for his crimes meticulously, breaking into homes to unlock windows, unload guns, and hide ligatures for future use. Initially targeting women who were alone, he later shifted his focus to attacking couples. He would bind both partners, then take the woman into another room to touch her while the man remained tied up. After these horrific acts, he would leave quietly, leaving his victims in a state of fear and uncertainty. His were brutal and cold-blooded. In one instance, he chased down and shot a couple who were walking their dog after they attempted to flee from him. The proximity of this crime to other attack locations allowed the FBI to link it to the East Area Rapist. Despite numerous composite sketches and extensive investigations, DeAngelo evaded capture for years. He communicated with his victims and the police, sometimes through phone calls, further taunting them and demonstrating his control over the situation. The key to DeAngelo's eventual capture was advanced DNA technology. Investigators used genetic tracing to identify distant relatives of DeAngelo, constructing extensive family trees to narrow down the suspect list. In a covert operation, police collected DNA from DeAngelo's car door handle and a tissue in his garbage. which matched samples from the Golden State. Deputies from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office arrested D'Angelo on April 24, 2018. He faced multiple counts of first-degree. In a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of in 2020. The statute of limitations had passed for the attacks and burglaries, preventing additional charges. Joseph James D'Angelo is currently serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is incarcerated in protective custody at California State Prison Corcoran. His arrest and conviction brought closure to one of the most prolonged and terrifying chapters in California's criminal history. In the early 2000s, while imprisoned in Montana, Scott Lee Kimball claimed to be a hitman. He adopted the nickname Hannibal, inspired by a fictional serial though he wasn't known as a at that time. His criminal record included theft, bad checks, and forgery. But Kimball had a darker secret many will soon come to find out. He was indeed a particularly of women. Kimball devised a plan to get released from prison by offering to inform on a for hire plot involving his cellmate Steve Ennis and Ennis's girlfriend, Jennifer Markham. Markham, a 25-year-old Denver stripper and mother, had become acquainted with Kimball. During this period, the FBI was investigating a major ecstasy operation in Denver, and Kimball convinced them he could infiltrate the drug ring and provide valuable information. By December 2002, Kimball persuaded the FBI to employ him as a paid informant, partly due to the for hire angle involving Markham, who was a potential witness in a DEA methamphetamine case against Ennis. Ennis allegedly sought to eliminate another witness and planned to use Markham for this purpose. Kimball's scheme worked, and by the end of the year, he was released from prison with minimal supervision. Tragically, within a few months of his release, Jennifer Markham disappeared. Between August 2003 and September 2004, Kimball's uncle, Terry Kimball, along with Casey McLeod and Leanne Emery, also vanished. Terry Kimball, originally from Georgia, was living with his nephew in Colorado at the time of his disappearance. In a twisted turn of events, Scott Kimball married Casey McLeod's mother, Lori, and they spent their honeymoon in the area where Casey's remains would later be found. The investigation of Kimball was complex, involving FBI Special Agent Jonathan D. Grusing and Lafayette Police Department Detective Gary Thatcher, among others. They faced a convoluted case spanning multiple jurisdictions and involving several federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. Grusing's involvement began in November 2006, when Kimball became a suspect in the The FBI's Denver office assigned him to investigate the for hire allegations around Jennifer Markham's disappearance. Grusing learned that Kimball had claimed an associate of Ennis Markham due to her potential testimony against Ennis in the methamphetamine case. As Grusing delved deeper, he found that both Markham's and Kimball's cell phones had been inactive from February 17 to 20, 2003, despite significant prior contact between them. Kimball claimed he had been in the mountains near Craig, Colorado during this period, but was evasive about his activities. Jennifer Markham's father, Bob, and Casey McLeod's father, Rob, took proactive steps in investigating their daughter's disappearances, feeling law enforcement wasn't sufficiently engaged. Bob Markham publicized Jennifer's case through billboards and media appearances, while Rob McLeod connected the dots between Kimball and both missing women. The family's investigations revealed a third person connected to Kimball, his uncle Terry, had also disappeared. They presented their findings to the FBI, which led to a more serious investigation into Kimball. Grusing's findings included that Markham's last cell phone usage was on February 17, 2003, and her car was found at Denver International Airport with no record of her on outbound flights. Kimball had spun a tale that she had gone to New York City to purchase a gun for hire plot. Further investigations led to discoveries about Leanne Emery's disappearance. Emery, an avid caver, vanished in January 2003. Her car was found abandoned in Utah, and her credit cards were used across several states, though not by her. Email correspondence suggested she was involved in something dangerous, referring to orders from Hannibal. In early 2009, Kimball struck a plea deal, pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree in the deaths of Terry Kimball, Jennifer Markham, Leanne Emery, and Casey McLeod. He agreed to assist authorities in finding his victims' remains. The remains of Leanne Emery were found in Utah, and Terry Kimball's remains were located in Vail Pass. Casey McLeod's remains were identified in Colorado. However, Jennifer Markham's remains have never been found. Kimball was sentenced to 53 years in prison on theft and other charges, and received an additional 70-year sentence for the His estimated parole eligibility date is July 28, 2056, when he would be 89 years old. Dennis Rader, famously known as the BTK, grew up in a family where he didn't get much attention. His parents were usually busy, working late hours, leaving Dennis and his siblings to fend for themselves. As he grew up in Wichita, Kansas, Rader started showing signs of disturbing behavior. He found pleasure in hurting animals, a trait that is often linked with deeper psychological issues. Rader's inner world was filled with dark fantasies, particularly about hurting helpless women. This was a secret part of his life that he managed to keep hidden from everyone around him. To the outside world, Dennis Rader was just a regular guy, polite and well-mannered. Little did they know about the monster lurking beneath this facade. He completed high school but didn't do well in college, dropping out after just 1 year. Rader then served a brief stint in the U.S. Air Force. He got married in 1970 and started a family, having 2 children. His career path was varied. He worked different jobs and eventually graduated from Wichita State University in 1979, where he studied criminal justice. Rader's work at a home security company is particularly chilling. He installed cameras for clients who were worried about the BTK, not knowing that the they feared was the one helping to secure their homes. Besides his professional life, Rader was also active in his church and served as a scout leader. Of 4 Otero family members on January 15, 1974, marked the beginning of the horror Rader unleashed. The investigation found semen at the crime scene, but none of the victims had been assaulted. Rader sought recognition for his crimes. He left a letter in a book at the Wichita Public Library, detailing the and revealing the name he wanted to be known by, BTK, standing for Bind, Torture. In April of that year, Rader attacked a 21-year-old woman in her home. Her brother, who was shot during the attack, survived, but the woman did not. Rader continued his spree, strangling more victims in 1977. He wrote to a nearby TV station, desiring fame and frustrated by the lack of media attention. Rader's final known was in 1991, after which the case went cold. In 2004, when it was speculated that BTK might have died, Rader sent evidence from his 9th to the police, reigniting the case. Over the next year, he sent multiple communications to the police, desperate to regain the spotlight. The end of Rader's reign of terror came due to his overconfidence. He sent a floppy disk to the police, asking if it could be traced. The police lied that it couldn't, and when Rader sent the disk, they found metadata linking it to him. DNA evidence from the first scene matched Rader's, leading to his arrest. On August 19, 2005, Dennis Rader was found guilty of 10 counts of and is currently held in solitary confinement at El Dorado Correctional Facility. Kristen Heather Gilbert, born in Fall River, Massachusetts on November 13, 1967, was an intelligent young woman whose life took a dark turn. As the first child of Richard, an electronics engineer, and Claudia, a stay-at-home mom and part-time supply teacher, Kristen grew up in a seemingly normal environment. She had a younger sister born in 1974 who excelled academically, breezed through her classes, and enjoyed typical childhood activities like watching soap operas and babysitting. However, during her teenage years, after the family moved to Groton, Massachusetts, Kristen's behavior started changing. She became a compulsive liar, often concocting elaborate stories, including claiming to be related to Lizzie Borden, the infamous figure from Fall River accused of axe in 1893. Kristen graduated high school with honors at just 16 and pursued a degree at Bridgewater State College. During this period, she began exhibiting troubling behaviors, including verbal and physical abuse towards her boyfriends. At 19, Kristen met Glenn Gilbert, whom she married in 1988. After graduating with a nursing degree, she took a job at the Leeds Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Massachusetts in 1989. Her performance as a nurse was notable for its competence and effectiveness, particularly in cases of medical emergencies. However, during this period, her life took a sinister turn. Kristen's marriage was turbulent, with incidents like chasing her husband with a knife. In the mid-1990 SS, she started an affair with James Perot, a hospital security guard. This was also the time when an alarming number of deaths occurred in her ward, earning her the nickname Angel of Death among colleagues. These deaths were initially not seen as suspicious due to the patient's health histories. In 1995, Kristen's affair became more serious, and her behavior at work became more suspicious. Patients began to suffer inexplicable cardiac arrests and deaths under her watch. By February 1996, her colleagues raised concerns, and an investigation into the unusual number of deaths on her shifts commenced. As the investigation unfolded, Kristen's personal life unraveled. She separated from her husband and checked into psychiatric facilities intermittently. It was during one such stay that she confessed to her lover, James, about her guilt over the patient's deaths. In 1998, Kristen Gilbert faced grave charges that shook the foundations of the medical community and the public's trust in healthcare professionals. The allegations were numerous and horrifying, multiple counts of and attempted. The authorities were compelled to undertake a meticulous and unsettling investigation, which included the exhumation of bodies. These exhumations were critical as they aimed to detect the presence of epinephrine in the deceased systems. Epinephrine, commonly known as adrenaline, is a medicine that, while used in medical emergencies, can be lethal in high doses or when administered improperly, causing cardiac arrest. The case progressed to a high-profile trial in 2000, a proceeding that garnered significant media attention and public interest. The trial was extensive and complex, featuring over 70 witnesses, each contributing pieces to a disturbing puzzle. These testimonies ranged from colleagues who worked alongside Gilbert at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center to experts who provided insights into the medical aspects of the case. The prosecution presented more than 200 pieces of evidence, painting a picture of Gilbert's actions and the resulting tragic consequences. The prosecution argued that Gilbert, a licensed nurse, exploited her medical knowledge and access to lethal substances to commit these heinous acts. They suggested that her motivations were varied, ranging from a desire for attention and excitement during emergency situations to deeper, more sinister psychological impulses. In 2001, after careful deliberation, the jury found Kristen Gilbert guilty on multiple counts. The verdict was 3 counts of first-degree, 1 count of second-degree, and 2 counts of attempted. The gravity of her crimes was reflected in the severity of the sentence: 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole plus an additional 20 years. This sentence meant that Gilbert would spend the rest of her life behind bars, a decision that brought a sense of justice to the families of the victims, though it could never compensate for their loss. Kristen Gilbert was subsequently incarcerated in a federal prison in Carswell, Texas. Her case remains a stark reminder of the potential for evil hidden behind a facade of professionalism and care. It raises questions about trust, responsibility, and the mechanisms in place to detect and prevent such crimes within critical professions like nursing. Gilbert's actions not only ended innocent lives but also cast a shadow on the noble profession of nursing, leaving an indelible mark on those who knew her and on the public consciousness. The Dnipropetrovsk maniacs, a name that sends chills down the spine, refers to 2 19-year-old individuals, Viktor Sayenko and Igor Suprunyuk, who committed a series of heinous crimes in Ukraine. In a span of just a few weeks in 2007, they were responsible for over 20, a spree that shocked and horrified the nation due to its brutality and randomness. Their first known attacks occurred on June 25, 2007. Extreme violence characterized the day as they a 33-year-old woman who was merely walking down the street. Within the same hour, they targeted a man sleeping on a bench, beating him beyond recognition. These initial crimes set the tone for their subsequent actions, characterized by indiscriminate and extreme cruelty. As July 2007 unfolded, the body count and horror escalated. On July 1st, 2 more victims were discovered. Within just a few days, 3 additional people were brutally murdered. The maniacs seemed to choose their victims at random, often targeting those who appeared vulnerable, like the elderly, children, or those under the influence of alcohol. Their method of was particularly gruesome. Most of the victims were bludgeoned to death with blunt objects, like hammers, leaving their bodies and unrecognizable. Some victims were even tortured before their deaths, with reports of eyes being gouged out while they were still alive. The maniacs didn't just they also robbed their victims, selling stolen items in local pawn shops. The brutality and apparent lack of motive made the case especially challenging and terrifying for both the public and law enforcement. The breakthrough in the case came from the testimony of a surviving victim and witnesses to one of the scooter attacks. The police were able to generate a composite sketch of the attackers, which eventually led to the arrest of the trio on July 23, 2007. Sayenko and Suprunyuk were apprehended while attempting to sell stolen goods, while their accomplice, Alexander Hanja, was arrested in his home. Upon arrest, the extent of their crimes was revealed through the disturbing content found on their cell phones, including videos and pictures of their The three were charged with 29 incidents encompassing 21 and 8 additional attacks. During the trial, Sayenko and Suprunyuk were found guilty of premeditated and sentenced to life imprisonment. Hanja, who was not directly involved in the was found guilty of robbery and received a 9-year prison sentence. The Dnipropetrovsk maniacs' spree stands as one of the most horrific crime waves in recent history. Their actions not only took the lives of many innocent people, but also left a lasting scar on the psyche of a nation, showcasing the depths of human depravity and the importance of swift and effective law enforcement response. Gary Leon Ridgway, known as the Green River, was one of the most notorious serial in U.S. history. His story is both disturbing and complex. From a young age, Gary exhibited troubling behavior. He had a difficult relationship with his mother and was known to have violent thoughts. As a teenager, he even stabbed a young boy, signaling the beginning of his violent tendencies. After graduating high school at the age of 20, Ridgway joined the U.S. Navy, where he served in Vietnam. During his time in the military, he frequently visited workers and contracted gonorrhea, a fact that further fueled his anger and hatred, particularly towards women. A string of marriages and a burgeoning religious zeal characterized Gary's life after the military. He married 3 times, having a son during his second marriage. Despite his outward show of religiosity, Ridgway couldn't suppress his dark urges. He continued to solicit workers, driven by a deep-seated loathing. The Green River first known victim was a 16-year-old girl who went missing after leaving her foster home. Her body was later found in the Green River, giving Ridgway his infamous moniker. Over the next few years, Ridgway's crimes escalated in both frequency and brutality. He targeted mostly workers and runaways, making him particularly difficult to track. Ridgway's method was cold and calculated. He would strangle his victims and often return to the bodies for necrophilic acts. Another notorious serial Ted Bundy, first suggested this horrifying detail while consulting with the police about the case. By 1982, it was evident to the police that they were dealing with a prolific serial. The Green River Task Force was established, but Ridgway evaded capture for years. In the 1980s and 1990s, he is believed to have at least 71 women, making him the second most prolific serial in U.S. history. The breakthrough in this case came through DNA technology. Samples taken from Ridgway in the 1980s were matched to evidence from the leading to his arrest in 2001. In a chilling confession, Ridgway revealed the extent of his crimes, claiming to have lost count of the number of women he On November 30, 2001, Gary Ridgway was arrested at his workplace, with DNA evidence linking him to the Green River. He was charged with multiple counts of In a bid to avoid the death penalty, Ridgway struck a plea deal in 2003, agreeing to help locate the remains of his victims. He was eventually convicted of 49 but confessed to more. Gary Ridgway is currently serving life imprisonment without the possibility of parole at the Washington State Penitentiary. His case remains one of the most disturbing and significant in the history of American crime. David Berkowitz, better known as the Son of Sam, terrorized New York City in the late 1970s with a series of brutal shootings. Richard David Falco was born on June 1, 1953, and Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz, a Jewish-American couple, adopted him a few days later. They changed his first and middle names to David Richard Berkowitz. Following high school, Berkowitz joined the United States Army, served honorably, and was discharged in 1974. Afterward, he sought out his birth mother, Betty, to learn about the circumstances of his birth and adoption. This revelation seemed to have a profound impact on Berkowitz, who already displayed signs of antisocial behavior. Berkowitz's first known attack occurred in 1975 when he used a knife, but both victims survived. After this failed attempt, he switched to using a handgun. His first shooting, attributed to the son of Sam, occurred on July 29, 1976, targeting two women, Donna Loria and Jody Valenti, sitting in a car. Loria was instantly, while Valenti survived with injuries. This attack marked the beginning of Berkowitz's reign of terror in New York City. His method was consistent. He targeted young women, usually sitting in cars, and shot them without warning. The randomness and apparent motivelessness of the attacks created widespread fear and paranoia. The media frenzy around these was unprecedented. Berkowitz taunted the police and the public with letters, reveling in the chaos he caused. He claimed to be under the control of a demonic entity in the form of a dog named Sam in these communications and referred to himself as the son of Sam. Berkowitz's attacks continued through 1976 and 1977, with each incident seemingly more brazen than the last. He varied his locations and victims, but maintained his method of sudden, violent shootings. The police, under intense pressure to catch the launched one of the biggest manhunt operations in New York City's history. The break in the case came from a parking ticket issued near the scene of one of the shootings. The police traced the car to Berkowitz, leading to his arrest on August 10, 1977. During his arrest, Berkowitz appeared calm and even said, "Well, you got me." During interrogation, Berkowitz confessed to the shootings and claimed that he was obeying orders from a demon that possessed his neighbor's dog. He was charged with multiple counts of and sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences in prison. Over the years, Berkowitz has altered his account of the events, at times claiming that he was part of a satanic cult. David Berkowitz is currently serving his sentence at the Shawangunk Correctional Facility in Ulster County, New York. His case remains one of the most notorious in American criminal history, epitomizing the fear and paranoia of a city under siege by seemingly random and inexplicable violence. What did you think about these people? Let us know in the comments.
Right now, a serial killer is stalking his next victim in New York City. Watching, waiting, ready to strike.
As terrifying as serial killers are, something about them seems to fascinate the public psyche. What's even more terrifying is knowing that some of these killers have never been caught, and they're still walking around society, probably smiling at strangers on the street and shopping at the local market, scouting for their next unsuspecting victim. Today, we'll be delving into 4 chilling and notorious cases of serial killers still active in 2024. 75. That's how many people the Chicago Strangler is believed to have killed within the span of 19 years. But with a body count sitting at such an astonishing number, why hasn't the killer ever been caught? Why has law enforcement done nothing to look into the murders? And why is this case so polarizing? The murders take place in Chicago's South and West Side neighborhoods, the earliest of which dates back to 1999 with a woman named Angela Ford. Angela had left home to pick up her children's report cards. She went missing, not to be found until days later when she was found unconscious. She remained in a coma and eventually died a year and a half later, in 2001. In 2002, another woman was killed in a horrible way. The pattern continued in 2007, when the body of Teresa Bunn, who was 8 months pregnant, was found in a dumpster. The very next day, the body of a woman named Hazel Lewis was found in a burning trash can at an elementary school. For clarity, by the end of 2019, the police had managed to solve 24 of the 75 cases, resulting in the arrests of 13 different men. But that still leaves 51 victims unaccounted for, all murdered in a pattern that is hard to miss. Everybody was found in similar locations in the neighborhoods of Chicago's South and West Side, either in abandoned buildings, alleyways, garbage bins, parks, or snowdrifts. A lot of the women had a history of prostitution, often had previous experiences with the justice system, and about 3/4 were black. Most victims were found in trash cans, plastic bags, or bound and gagged. They were all killed in a gruesome way. The brutality of their deaths can only be inferred from the way their bodies were found. But despite this, the media is all but lukewarm on the matter, and law enforcement has been hesitant to jump on the idea that the murders were perpetrated by a single killer. The Chicago Strangler is the name given to the perpetrator of the crime, the single serial killer that many believe is behind the murder. Thomas Hargrove, founder of the Murder Accountability Project, is one of the many who believe there's a serial killer at large in Chicago. In his words, "We know this is a series, we have no doubt. First of all, almost all of the victims were recovered out of doors, often in alleyways or abandoned properties. That's pretty unusual. At least 3/4 of the victims' deaths had a clear erotic component. The victims were found partially disrobed or completely nude." He declared in his conclusion, 51 different men did not kill these 51 women. Many of these women, probably most of them, were killed by men who had killed before. He also pointed out the fact that the murders stopped in 2014 before kicking back up in 2017. He believes this is because the killer was imprisoned at the time. However, despite the similarities between the cases, the belief of the general public and the work of the Murder Accountability Project, the Chicago police still believe the deaths were isolated incidents. Our next case occurred on the island of Kauai, Hawaii, and it involves a serial killer that has not been identified to this day. On the 7th of April, 2000, the body of a woman was discovered in a ditch close to Polyhale State Park, a remote wild beach on the western side of the Kauai, Hawaii. The woman, 38-year-old Lisa Bissell, had been heavily assaulted before her death. An investigation led to the discovery that she had been abducted from another part of the island before being murdered.
Daughter as well, a sister, So you do understand in what the families go through.
There was no way to conclusively identify who her killer in Kauai was until only a month later, another woman was attacked. This time, she lived to tell her harrowing tale. It was May 22, 2000, and a 52-year-old woman was working in her yard when a strange man approached her. The man spoke up saying, "My name is John, and I'm homeless." Being the kind person she was, the woman told him about a neighbor who frequently let homeless people camp out on their property. After giving him the necessary directions, she turned around to continue the work she was doing. That's when the man struck. He grabbed her and violently pulled her behind the house. There, he attacked her, causing serious injuries and trauma. During the assault, he attempted to inflict further harm with a knife, but the weapon was rendered ineffective. Panicked, he threw the knife in a bush and fled the scene. The woman had to crawl for 3 hours until she reached a telephone and called for help.
But she survived and was able to miraculously climb 2 stories stairs and call for help.
Even after experiencing such a traumatic event, the woman was able to describe her attacker for a sketch of the man to be made. However, on August 30, 2000, the attacker struck again. The decomposing body of a woman was found at a remote campsite near Pacala Point Beach. The 43-year-old Maui resident, Darren R. Singer, tragically lost her life after a severe and brutal assault. The extent of the violence rendered her unrecognizable. Investigators determined that she was murdered at least 12 hours prior to the discovery of her body. A large memorial service was held in her honor, but it was clear that the attacks had rocked the island. However, investigators were sensing a pattern in the attacks. The victims all fell around the same demographic, middle-aged Caucasian women with similar heights and weights. They had all been alone when attacked only to meet a violent assault and the end of a knife. Moreover, all the attacks took place on the west coast of Kauai. A few months after the attack, the 52-year-old victim who'd survived the killer's attack was flown to Honolulu and shown a police lineup. The woman was able to eliminate 2 men from the lineup as being the perpetrator, but was not able to narrow down the lineup any further. The police conducted extensive inquiries, including questioning 70 individuals with relevant criminal backgrounds on the island. The main person of interest in the investigation was identified as Waldorf Roy Wilson Waldorf, who had a previous conviction for serious offenses in Oahu in 1983, moved to Kauai in January 1999 as part of his parole arrangement. However, within a year, he faced arrest for not adhering to his parole conditions, which occurred amidst inquiries into other serious allegations. Due to his presence on the island during the time of the attacks, his history, and his parole violation, the police strongly believed that he had their guy, but Wilson sued the Kauai County Police Department and a magazine that ran the story that he was accused of the murders for defamation. The lawsuit was later dismissed, and Waldorf would walk out of this case a free man for entirely different reasons. His DNA was tested against the DNA of the perpetrator, and the result was inconclusive. Because of this, he was never charged with the two murders and the vicious attack of the surviving victim. It is believed that to this day, the Kauai killer, or John, patiently waits on the island looking for vulnerable women to attack. Our next case involves a name so infamous and 11 murders that are far from being solved. You may have already heard of this New York serial killer, but the true extent of his crimes is more harrowing than you can imagine, and his 14-year reign of terror is yet to be crowned with his arrest. From 1996 to 2011, a series of tragic incidents in Long Island led to the loss of at least 10 lives, with the possibility of more yet to be discovered. Many of the identified individuals were using Craigslist for their work, which led to the perpetrator being referred to as the Craigslist Ripper. However, the term Long Island serial killer emerged under different circumstances. The discovery of the victims was an unintended outcome during an unrelated investigation. On December 11, 2010, the Suffolk County Police Department Missing Persons Bureau was conducting an investigation into the disappearance of 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert, a woman who had gone missing after fleeing from a client's home. Before she completely fell off the radar, she made a harrowing 23-minute-long call to 911 saying, "They are trying to kill me." Officer John Malia was tasked with the responsibility of searching for Shannon with his trained cadaver dog, a German Shepherd named Blue. The officer kept his search designated for a gated beach community on Ocean Parkway in Oak Beach, Suffolk County. It was the last place Shannon had been seen, so it was as good a place as any to begin looking. Unfortunately, for the entirety of summer 2010, Officer Malia was nowhere closer to finding the missing woman. That was, until that day in December 2010, when Officer Malia decided to widen his field of search. The first discovery of human remains was made by the side of Ocean Parkway in Oak Beach on December 11, 2010. He started searching the shoulder of the parkway, away from the gated area but still in the area, going off on FBI data indicating that dumped bodies are frequently found close to roadways.
Like a car pulled up and opened the door and the bodies were dumped into the bushes.
During the search, Blue, the trained cadaver dog, detected something unusual. They found skeletal remains, but these were not of Shannon Gilbert. Instead, they belonged to Melissa Barthelemy, a 24-year-old from Erie County, New York, who had been missing since July 12, 2009. Melissa, who had been using Craigslist for work, had met with a client on the night she disappeared. That evening, she made a bank transaction of $900 and tried to contact a former boyfriend. The call didn't go through, and Melissa was never seen again. However, the story doesn't end there. 1 week later, Melissa's teenage sister, Amanda, began receiving strange phone calls.
So excited. Oh my God, Melissa's finally calling me. And then there's a guy on the other end.
The calls received were deeply unsettling and offensive, believed to be from the individual responsible for Melissa's disappearance. The caller made derogatory inquiries about Amanda's relationship to her sister, growing more distressing over time. This alarming series of calls lasted for 5 weeks, concluding with the caller grimly informing Amanda of Melissa's fate and making a chilling statement about it. Authorities traced the calls to Madison Square Garden, Midtown Manhattan, and Massapequa, but were unable to determine who was making them. Melissa's body wasn't the only one found on Ocean Parkway that day. While searching the scene, 3 more bodies were discovered. Another victim, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, was 25 years old when she went missing. She was from Norwich, Connecticut, and was last seen on July 9, 2007. That night, she called a friend in Connecticut and told her that she was planning on meeting a client outside of the motel and planned to spend the day in New York City. The mother of 2, in an effort to support her family and manage her mortgage payments, initially turned to Craigslist for income. She later transitioned to an escort job at a Super 8 motel in Manhattan. However, facing the challenge of an eviction notice, she felt compelled to return to her previous line of work. After she'd gone missing, her friend Sarah Carnes received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. The man claimed he'd seen Maureen alive working at a brothel in Queens. He didn't give Sarah the location of the brothel or identify himself, but he did say he would call her back later with an address. He never did. The third body found that day belonged to 22-year-old Megan Waterman, a mother from South Portland, Maine, who went missing on June 6, 2010. Like the other victims, she'd placed advertisements on Craigslist as an escort. At the time of her disappearance, she was staying at a motel in Hauppauge, New York, 15 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach. Sadly, Megan had been a victim of human trafficking, and her disappearance that night ended in her gruesome death. The final victim was 27-year-old Lynn Costello of West Babylon, New York, a small town just 10 miles north of Gilgo Beach. She went missing on September 2, 2010, after going to meet up with a stranger who had called her several times and offered $1,500 for her services. The four bodies were found approximately 500 feet from each other and were dubbed the Gilgo Four.
Slab was selected because its ability to take dampness, moisture, and breathe, which would promote decay, as well as act as camouflage.
Again, the story is far from over. The following year, on March 29th and April 4th, 2011, in Suffolk and Nassau counties, 6 more bodies that police had been dumped earlier than the 4 first found were discovered. The bodies were found in another parkway near Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach, about 2 miles east of those found in December. The first individual discovered in this case was 24-year-old Valerie Mack, also known as Melissa Taylor, who was reported missing in 2000. Initially, only part of her remains were found in a wooded area near Halsey Manor Road and Mill Road. Further searches in April 2011 led to the discovery of additional remains. It wasn't until May 2020 that she was finally identified. Another victim, Jessica Taylor, was also dismembered and disposed of in a similar manner. 34-year-old Karen Vergata met a similar fate. Other discoveries included the bodies of a mother and her child, and the body of a cross-dressing male simply dubbed Asian male. There are other possible victims that haven't been conclusively tied to the Long Island serial killer, but with a clear modus operandi identified and a laundry list of victims, it was hard to ignore that there was a serial killer on the loose. The real question was, who was he? In September 2017, a prosecutor suggested John Bitroff, a carpenter from Manorville with 2 previous murder convictions, might have been responsible for some of the Gilgo Beach cases. He was arrested, and although he was convicted for 2 separate earlier murders, no statement was made on his involvement in the Gilgo Beach murders. In July 2023, a 59-year-old Nassau County resident was arrested and charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. He is also the prime suspect in the death of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. The man, Rex Andrew Huerman, became a suspect after a Chevrolet Avalanche identified by a witness and linked to one of the killings was registered in his name. His cell phone records also revealed that he had been in contact with 3 of the 4 victims. It was discovered that the man had peculiar taste. His search history revealed sadistic materials and images of the victims and their relatives. His DNA was also linked to hair found on the burlap wrappings of one of the bodies. He pleaded not guilty, but ultimately had no conclusive ties to the 10 victims found. It's theorized that the killer possibly has a law enforcement background, judging by how he's managed to elude capture for so long. And as for Shannon Gilbert, the woman whose body started it all, her body was found a year after the remains of the Gilgo Four. And although her cause of death remains contested, with police claiming accidental drowning while an independent autopsy determined possible strangulation, it is believed that her murder is an isolated incident unrelated to the Long Island serial killer case. Her now deceased mother strongly believed otherwise. The Jeff Davis 8, also known as the Jennings 8, is a case shrouded in mystery through and through. This series of unsolved murders took place between the years 2005 and 2009 in Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana, when the bodies of 8 women were found in swamps and no one knows how they got there or has any idea who took their lives. But the hunt for a killer began with the discovery of the body of 28-year-old Loretta Lewis in a river. It was the 20th of 2005, and a fisherman was out on the Grand Marais Canal's East Fork, a few miles southwest of Jennings, angling when he found a body floating in the river. Loretta was last seen 3 days before her death, and she was found partially clothed and shoeless. The advanced decomposition caused difficulty identifying her cause of death, but an autopsy found Loretta had no physical injuries. The toxicology analysis indicated the presence of significant amounts of substances and alcohol in her system. However, the exact cause of her passing remained undetermined. It didn't take long before the authorities discovered that Loretta's wasn't the only skeleton in the waters, so to speak. The body of 30-year-old Ernestine Marie Daniels Patterson, was soon discovered on June 18th in a drainage canal off LA Highway 102. The mother of four, Iota State University employee and Jennings resident, was last seen on June 16, 2005, and her body was found partially clothed. Her death was ruled a homicide, and 2 people were arrested and charged with 2 end-degree murder, but were later released due to lack of evidence. The third victim was 21-year-old Kristen Gary Lopez, who was discovered by a fisherman on March 18th, completely nude in the Petit Jean Canal, a rural area near Cherokee Road right off LA 9, about 10 miles south of the town of Welsh. Again, the autopsy reports remained inconclusive on the cause of death, but toxicology results showed high levels of alcohol in her system. In May 2007, Frankie Richard and his niece, Hannah Connor, were arrested in connection with Lopez's death. The pair were also questioned about the other deaths before Kristen's body was even found, because Richard was reportedly seen with 3 of the victims in the last days of their lives. However, again, charges were dropped due to lack of evidence and conflicting witness statements. Also arrested was Tracy L. Chason, who reported Kristen missing. Investigators believe she knew where the body was when she made the report, and again, the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence and conflicting statements. The next victim, 26-year-old Whitney Dubois, was found nude on the May 12, 2007, at the intersection of Bobby and Earl Duhan Roads, approximately 5 miles outside of Jennings, Louisiana. Cause of death undetermined. High levels of alcohol and drugs were found in her system. On May 29, 2008, the remains of 23-year-old Laconia Muggy Brown were discovered on Rocca Road, near a police training area. She was found without shoes and wearing a white tank top-style shirt, which had changed color, possibly due to a diluted substance. It appeared that she had suffered significant harm, and unusual measures had been taken with her remains. She was last seen 2 days prior to the discovery, and it is believed that her remains were placed on the road only hours before they were found. Investigators are working to understand the full circumstances surrounding this tragic event. Next was 24-year-old Crystal Shea Benoit Zeno, who was found on September 11, 2008, near a dry irrigation canal a few miles from Jennings, Louisiana. The woman was married with a daughter, and she loved to spend time with family and friends. According to her parents, Crystal, who went by Shea, was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 12 and started using certain substances to cope with the illness. On the day her body was discovered, hunters reported a foul smell in a wooded area to authorities. Her body was found on the LaCour Road levee, off LA Highway 1126, a few miles southeast of Jennings. She was so badly decomposed that she wasn't identified until 2 months later with DNA. The 7th of the Jeff Davis 8 was also the youngest. 17-year-old Brittany Gary was last seen walking out of the Family Dollar store in Jennings. She never came back home. Sometime that same day, she was kidnapped, and although her family hoped she would be found alive soon, that wasn't the case. On November 15, 2008, her deceased body was found in a grassy area outside Jennings. She was a trusted friend of Kristen Gary Lopez and knew several of the other victims. The final body, that of 26-year-old Nicole Guillory, was found off Interstate 10 on August 19, 2009. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, determining the exact causes of death for most of the victims proved challenging. Investigations did indicate that Ernestine and Laconia suffered severe injuries, but conclusive details regarding the others were not ascertainable. While authorities hypothesized that asphyxia might have been involved, the state of the remains left many questions unanswered. What we do know for certain is the strange connection between the victims. While the other cases we've looked at involves victims who were total strangers to one another, the Jeff Davis 8 knew each other well. Some were even blood-related, with Kristen Gary Lopez and Brittany Gary being cousins, and Gary living with Crystal Benoit shortly before her death. Investigators also revealed a pattern of similar traits that the 8 shared. They were all living in poverty, suffering from mental illness, and all had histories of working in the Jennings South. Another peculiar tidbit is the victims' connections with law enforcement. All the women served as informants for the police about the local illegal medicine trade, and some even provided police with information about other Jeff Davis 8 victims before their own deaths. One of the victims, Kristen Lopez, witnessed the police shooting and death of a dealer named Leonard Crochet in 2005. She also knew Alvin Bootsy Lewis, the boyfriend of victim Whitney Dubois and father of her child, as well as the brother-in-law of the first victim, Loretta Chason Lewis, along with several individuals connected to the Jeff Davis 8 case. It seems that, when it comes to this case, each victim isn't the target of a serial killer hungry for power. It's that of a calculating murderer looking to shut witnesses up. Despite the fact that Leonard Crochet was unarmed when police shot and killed him, a grand jury's investigation revealed that there was no evidence to support a negligent homicide charge against the officers. But the decision put out an entire flurry of rumors against the police. Witnesses told investigators they believed the police had killed many of the victims because of what they knew about the shooting of Leonard Crochet. In December 2008, a task force consisting of 14 federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies was formed to solve the Jeff Davis 8 case. And although the task force searched for a serial killer from the outset, the more an investigator looked into it, the more the connections between the victims were brought to light. It was even revealed that the families of the victims believe that the police are actually responsible for the deaths. Ethan Brown, an investigative reporter who has been documenting the case, revealed that task force investigative reports present witness interviews in which local law enforcement were implicated in the murders. 2 female inmates confessed to working with the sheriff's office to dispose of evidence in the Lopez case. But strangely enough, the sergeant who took their statements was forced out of his job, and the allegations were ignored by law enforcement. In an interview, Nicole Guillory's mother, Barbara, gave Ethan Brown insight on her daughter's behavior. She said, "She was always paranoid. It got to the point where she did not want to go anywhere by herself." Adding, "I think she could feel that they were closing in on her." Nicole even refused to celebrate her 27th birthday. Barbara said, "I bought some icing and cake for her birthday. She said, 'Mama, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to be here.'" Before her death, Guillory housed her 4 children with relatives. A task force witness revealed that in her final days, she was scared of someone, but she would not say who. Nicole also mentioned that she knew who killed the girls. Barbara believes that her daughter was murdered because she witnessed the corruption of local law enforcement. To Brown, she said, "She used to tell us all the time it was the police killing the girls. We'd say, 'Nicole, a name, something. Write a letter and leave it somewhere. Let us know. We can help you.' 'No, Mama, it's too far gone. It's too big. I'd rather y'all not know anything. That way, nothing can happen to you all.' She knew, and that's why they killed her." Several other families of victims have similar stories. Ethan Brown wrote, "Gail Brown, a sister of the 5th victim, Laconia Muggy Brown, told me that just before Muggy was killed, she worriedly informed her family that she was investigating a murder with a cop. The cop wanted to give her $500 to tell what happened. And she knew what was going on, she told me, referring to her sister's work as a cooperator. I think it was a cop that killed my sister." Again, task force witness interviews corroborate the Brown family accounts, with one individual telling the investigators, Laconia Brown told her that 3 police officers were going to kill her. When it comes to the accusations of corruption and misconduct lodged against the Jennings police force, it's an understatement to say the list is long. Back in the 70s, local law enforcement was riddled with officers who dabbled in illegal medicine trafficking. In March 1990, 2 locals broke into the sheriff's office, stealing an eye-watering 300 pounds of illegal substances. When one of the burglars was interviewed, he confessed that Frankie Richard and Ted Gary, who was the chief deputy sheriff at the time, were his accomplices. No charges were brought against the 2 men. There have been reports of sheriffs using parish funds to purchase personal items illegally, sheriffs unlawfully and purposefully stopping cars with out-of-state plates, even more reports of improper dealings with inmates, and even the murder of one officer and his wife by another officer. Perhaps Ethan Brown is right to think that there's no serial killer at work here, because the crimes of the Jennings law enforcement are hard to ignore. In October 2003, 8 female Jennings cops filed a civil rights lawsuit in federal court against Jennings Police Chief Donald Lucky DeLuche, a group of male officers, and the city of Jennings, accusing them of constant violence and harassment. In the complaint, a woman reported inappropriate and unwelcome behavior from a captain towards female officers. This included suggestive comments and an alleged incident of coerced intimate contact with a female officer. In January 2013, former Jennings Police Chief Johnny Lasseter was hit with a slew of charges, After a Louisiana State Police audit found $4,500 in cash, 1,800 pills, more than 380 grams of the white stuff, and several pounds of other substances missing from the department's evidence room. Sheriff's Office Chief Criminal Investigator Warren Gary was also accused of purchasing a truck suspected of having been used to transport a body for the purpose of discarding evidence. It's almost like the Jennings police force was full of officers who had exactly zero care for the law. But, with everything going on, they couldn't refuse to do anything about the 8 murders for much longer. In 2009, the sheriff ordered that every investigator working the Jeff Davis 8 case be swabbed for DNA to put the accusations against investigators at rest. And what you know, the office refused to comment on the results of the test. In total, police have only arrested or issued warrants for the arrest of 4 people in connection with the Jeff Davis 8 case. The question remains, is this the work of a serial killer or that of dirty cops? We'll let you answer that.